After a riveting set of conversations yesterday, we, especially all of us, are incredibly grateful that you have joined us today bright and early in the morning. In this panel, and in history itself, craft positions itself as a part of our own human history. And by that direction and definition, hand-based skill is part of mark making. If you look at human history, we'll start with the oldest caves. 2 months ago, it was declared that hand-based paint marking on them, dated to about 67,800 years ago, actually was found near Sulawesi in Indonesia. Now, as we honor this long stretch of human history, we place the context of today's panel, Craft, Métier, and Utopia, in that. Mira invited us to think about craft outside of the largely aesthetic categories like material, technique, or form. Continuing from Rachel Barney in her Tanner lecture series, titled Craft, Métier, Utopia, the metaphysical thesis of craft is unpacked. Mira gave us a few directions to unpack, so starting with to be a shoemaker or carpenter is not only to produce objects, but to live under the obligations of doing that as well. These obligations, when tied to ideas of self-realization and moral conduct that contribute to the good of society, constitutes a person's métier. Barney proposes a utopia of work based on the paradigm of craft, a vision of society where work is justifully distributed and practiced under one's métier contributes to collective flourishing. By Barney's calculations, this is the best case scenario and is possible when the triple value of craft, contributing to common good, self-realization, and shared pleasure came together. When Mira places this framework for us, the three speakers have responded to it in unique ways. One of the common threads would be to present craft not only as object, but a social model to imagine equitable futures through structures of work, collaboration, and shared responsibility. The three speakers are also going to talk about if there are any lessons to be learned through the métier of curatorship, and if yes, what are they? In these ruminations, curators Kristine Michael, Annapurna Garimella, and Pramod Kumar KG, who is requested me to call him Jahapana, reflect on this premise and will present in this order. Kristine Michael will present her decade-long curatorial career with artisanal and contemporary ceramics with a specific concentration on the Kumar caste and neo-craftspeople. Annapurna Garimella situates her research through leather craftspeople for whom world-making spans poetry, politics, spirituality, utilitarian making, music, and more. She explores how, in keeping this at the center, leather craft, and leather craftspeople might change the curator. Pramod examines this tension between craft as a lived practice and as a curated object, questioning whether curatorial discourse fetishizes artifacts while neglecting the social systems that produce them. To open us up to this learning, I invite Kristine to start us off.
Thank you so much, Shaleen, Meera, and Mamta, for having me here for this forum. Craft has historically been really marginalized, as has any artistic practice tied to function, sort of repetition, really the, domestic space, and been thought of as being disconnected from notions of authorship, aesthetic innovation, or sort of conceptual depth. But in India, potters or else kumhars are one of the lowest of the caste system, always located outside the village due to the smoke and the mess of the home workshop, even though making ritual vessels for all communities and linked to the god Vishwakarma. They have faced deep-seated prejudice for many generations. Craft traditions are based on caste and also community knowledge of materials and techniques linked to the local community, a hierarchy that in the past, as today, has failed to give them the most financial stability, the social equality, the mobility, and the access to the largely developing world. So in the slide, you see the past world of potters of Kutch. In that one of Jyoti Bhatt's iconic portraits of rural life of the mid-20th century, a world that has rapidly changed and that we cannot try and hold on to with sentiment but understand that craft always changes with its people's needs and aspirations. As a young design graduate, I wrote my first thesis about this changing world of newer materials such as plastics and stainless steel, threatening the livelihood of rural potters in a very early India magazine. Both Hindu and Muslim potters catered to the festivals and the domestic and the agricultural needs of rural and urban India. However, Western-style ceramic art, fostered in the art schools, really developed parallel to modernism and the arts and crafts movement. Studio pottery challenged class and gender stereotypes and started a specialist market and arena within which both the traditional artisan potters and urban women and neo-craft makers renegotiated gender roles. It was more open to the innovation and also provided economic opportunities for the women of all classes. It offered women an opportunity to study formally at art colleges and really set up their own studios, many at home, thus integrating the kitchen table with the studio workshop. It was only in the mid-20th century in India that ceramic art was not marginalized and was recognized as an art practice in both the National Exhibitions of Art, the National Gallery of Modern Art, and in urban fine art galleries. So I wear different hats as artist, designer, arts educator, researcher, writer, and I want to share with you my thoughts and experiences of actually, sort of curating craft. Being an artist curator is special because for me it brings together two ways of thinking, making art and shaping how art is experienced. This dual role creates for me a very distinct kind of curatorial practice. I approach exhibitions not just as a display of objects, but as a creative medium in itself. There is an embodied understanding through being a practitioner and understanding processes from the inside. There is also a stronger emphasis on process over product and a rethinking of authority and hierarchy. Instead of a top-down curatorial voice, I work collaboratively, creating dialogues between artists, materials, and audiences, making the exhibition feel more like a shared space of inquiry. What makes being an artist curator special is that it turns curating into a form of artistic practice, where thinking, making, and displaying are deeply connected. But for me, it was important to be close to both artisan and artists, watch them develop, and not subordinate their work to the curator's vision. I've realized that the curator's role is more that of enabling and allows an audience to a glimpse into their artistic landscapes that are slowly emerging. So curating is actually an extension of my artistic practice, where thinking, making, displaying converge to create an experience that is both reflective and also sort of generative. So Kumbharwada, here in Dharavi, Mumbai, is where now 300 potters, there used to be about 1,500, eke out a livelihood. Abbas Zakaria Galwani and his two brothers that you see here, Hanif and Yusuf, live and work there. His paternal grandfather, also a traditional potter, settled in Dharavi in 1921 from Sindh. He was featured as one of the community leaders in the 1961 census of Bombay crafts. So you can see the family space now, very, very different from that idyllic rural, picture. The family now works in terracotta, white earthenware, and glazed stoneware in a 3-storied workshop cum family home, where each room is less than 10 feet square. His specialization is in large pots for interiors and garden landscapes, while his brothers specialize in tableware and sculpture. So the exhibition that I did, Home is Where the Heart is offered a range of perspectives on how home is imagined, also represented, and also contested. One of the curatorial propositions was to discover ways in which the mediums of craft and the handmade can explore how memory, migration, and cultural dislocation shape our vision of home, where each signify different identities and forms of belonging. Abbas responded to the curatorial provocation by being inspired by a Kabir Doha about the inner space of the vessel, holding all of nature and the oceans and the stars, as well as the creator in it. Here, Abbas not only displayed his new work alongside other contemporary artists, but also was involved in a creative dialogue with me over 6 months. Besides equal exposure, the travel to Goa and the workshops that he conducted with the local people were important for him in creating awareness and building his own confidence in his creativity through the interactions that he had. My experience of working to reorganize the 4 pottery galleries of the Albert Hall Museum in Jaipur of the 19th century Henley collection made me realize the importance of museum collections, relating to audience and craftsmen, besides being a source of academic scholarship. Also curating the Kripal Singh Shekhawat exhibition at the JKK Jaipur, which later moved to the Museum of Legacies at the old Rajasthan School of Art at Jodi Bazaar, involved both detailed historical research of his 2 mediums, painting and pottery, and an understanding of the historical controversies of craft and fine art, and one man's attempt to revive a lost craft, as well as to change it with his inimitable style. So I will now share some of the collaborations that I have initiated through exhibitions between artisans and also contemporary artists. Really, collaborations like these breathe new life into craft, keeping it relevant while using it to tell stories that are intimate, also political, and also culturally rooted. So the creative proposition for Serendipity 2024 involved collaborations among contemporary and also vernacular artists between Goa and other parts of the country. Making alliances and links across geography and time, the exhibition reflected a deep connection between the present and the past, linking modern identity with the enduring legacy of the many peoples and cultures that make up a syncretic India, with Goa as its microcosm, transcending time and looking to the future. So these narratives were brought to life in a sensory journey with their unique interpretations to retell, reinvent, and reimagine this journey across time, material, and diverse imagery. Parthu Dasgupta, sculptor and painter, opened up connections between the Bengal and the Goa coastline with its history of the churnings of trade, conflict, and the assimilation of peoples. So this collaboration between Parthuda with Shankar Turi's Azuleo studio also used, the terracotta sculptures of the classic Goa rooster from the pottery of Zilu and his son Dattaram in Goa. Laila Freechild is a Jaipur-based visual artist whose practice explores the intersections of the female body, sexuality, patriarchy, and personal trauma. She reimagines the traditional craft of blue pottery through contemporary forms and personal narratives, merging its intricate methods with bold conceptual explorations of identity and lived experience. So this project was a collaboration with Ram Gopal Saini, a master blue pottery artist trained under Kripal Singh Shekhawat, and his daughter is now working alongside with him in the workshop. So this collaboration bridges also tradition with imagination. So the work reimagines home as a space where women can rest, a radical act in a world that has long demanded their constant doing. Using blue pottery, a craft historically associated with beauty and ornamentation within the home, the work explores how rest can become resistance and reclamation. The anatomical heart, held within a vase-like form, blooms with trees, flowers, and resting women. The vase, also a vessel for life and sort of decoration, mirrors how women's bodies have often been seen as nurturing, as ornamental, and contained. And in her second work, a ceramic pelvis cradling a womb reflects on our first physical home, the womb. As assigned female at birth, we carry our homes within us. This work honors that inner home, not only as a biological space, but as a symbol of origin, power, and sort of generative landscape. Lipi Biswas. Now, this 2019 exhibition discusses the creation of new craft communities through interventions in sustainability, enhancing creativity, and economic independence. Really, community handwork from the home is the only means of access to a mode of production compatible with the traditional female roles in India and the domestic setting. It reflects the lives and the environment of the predominantly female makers in a community practice that illustrates that traditional craft can evolve and assume its place in a globalized art craft consumer market. Inspired by sculptor Meera Mukherjee in Shantiniketan, Lipi Biswas and Vidyut Roy started Studio Bonar Pukurdanga as a journey in clay with the local Shantal community. Being close to Shilpa Shadan as well as Sriniketan with the strong Tagorean ethos permeating this entire environment, they interpreted the pottery cycle as a microcosm of man, nature, and culture. The project was an attempt to reduce gaps between the practices of tribal, folk, and urban potters. Their journey meanders around, discovering the world of design, of craftsmanship, studio art, and this is negotiated via a philosophical quest to bring about social change. Lipi Biswas works with the local Shantal community women and strives to make them financially independent as well as skilled in the making of ceramics. So the Button project, which is what she's showing here, started as a way of giving them financial independence and self-esteem. It was the beginning of a movement to earn a livelihood through self-respect. The skill set needed was simple. It was an object they could all relate to. The buttons are a metaphor for keeping two ends together, just like the women's lives are held together through their earnings via the button making. So the button carries thousands of experiences, and the narrative brings all these myriad buttons together and strings them with different natural fibers. So these tensile rivers carry a parallel story in the people, the button makers, so that they can flow freely running water with bounty and generosity. So Vanmala Jain and the Kaprakabi Foundation of Bombay has worked to bridge the gap between the vernacular and the contemporary, like Studio Bonar Pukurdanga, thus paving a way for new social and aesthetic modes of life and work. So she believes in the social and the moral imperative of the role of crafts, in the regeneration of livelihood, and the creative inspirational role it plays in the building of new communities with the outdated notion of the caste occupations. Craft as a socially engaged artistic collective practice within urban communities is counter to the art object, gallery discourse. And then Kaprakabi challenges the notion that there is only one mode of production for the design and raises issues of women's craft work being excluded from the art discourse. The community handwork from their homes is the only means of access to a mode of production really compatible with their female roles at the family. So they have successfully developed a new craft community in marginalized families living in Bombay by working with the non-potter families, and so enhancing their self-esteem, leading to greater creativity, self-expression, and self-discovery. So Mumbai Nukkad, which was an installation that reflects the lives and the environment of the predominantly female makers in their community, practice that illustrates that traditional craft can evolve and assume its place in a globalized art craft consumer market. So here one sees and identifies with the familiar figures of the Mumbai streets, the Konkani fish seller, the corner shop panwala, the office dabbawalas, and so on, in a never-ending jamboree of sort of community and life. So I would like to end with the image of two potter families who, like I'm sure many others are doing, have made the shift both in the development of their creative work and socially through higher education to see craft and art as a new way of life. Harkrishan Prajapati and his wife Ramarati, with their daughters Seema and Neetu from Uttamnagar, Delhi, broke the taboo of the woman working on the wheel. Seema is a BFA sculpture student from the Delhi College of Art and now works as an art teacher in an English medium school. And then you've got the family of B.R. Pandit and his wife Abhay, and his son Abhay and his wife Kushbu, who live and work in Bhayandar, Mumbai, and are also first generation college trained and exhibit in urban art galleries, as well as continuing their bonsai planters as the new urban requirements proliferate new needs and designs. So my radical act, taking off from the radical act that was spoken about yesterday, is to empower the artisan to become the curator. and curate his own community and others in exhibition spaces, in museums and galleries. And that's my moving beyond, is to withdraw from the entire act of curation. So in conclusion, I see my role as artist curator as not to impose a singular narrative, but to facilitate encounters between artists, materials, and audiences. Hierarchies are softened in favor of a more collaborative and responsive framework where multiple voices and sensibilities coexist. So the exhibition thus unfolds as a shared field of inquiry rather than as a fixed statement. Thank you very much.
It's a lot of information, and as you all were speaking, what came through comprehensively across all the three different perspectives being brought over here was that craft is something also that is instinctively and intuitively learned at home. It can be a stitch that is taught, it can be a recipe that is learned, it can be the different ways in which community gathers, and in the ways in which Kristine spoke with us about how recently thinking a lot through the different exhibitions that you've been part of. And I saw the one in Kochi as well, so yes. In you talking about how enabling the artist itself to become the curator as one of your reigning signing points in the entire presentation speaks very interestingly to when Annapurna spoke about Mutable, the exhibition we met at, where there was this whole conversation on undoing curatorial hierarchies about what receives a certain kind of importance in an exhibition versus another. And when Pramod spoke about the intangibles, talking a lot more about the social system, but not around the object, and not just making the object the hero of the story. What I find interestingly happening across all your presentations and all your thought processes is that there is the consistency of looking at something intangible around the object that becomes hugely part of the story. So something in my mind too that came was that in undoing curatorial hierarchy, something that's important to all of y'all, whether it is a gap in curriculum that you've highlighted very often, whether it is the ways of working within artistic communities, or whether it is through Pramod, how we understand documentation needs to highlight this as well. What would you advise or what would you suggest? Because in this audience we have curators of all parts of the professional ladder, artists of all parts of the professional ladder as well. So what would be your point of advice in terms of undoing these curatorial hierarchies in the three ways in which you all have defined your individual perspectives? That's something I'm very curious about.
Okay, so I have two things that I'd like to add to your question. One was the sort of training and the transmission of knowledge which used to happen at home, still happens at home, from father to son, etc. But now a lot happens from media, social media, because everybody's got a telephone, got a mobile phone and can look at Pinterest and YouTube videos and things like that. So that has been the great sort of leveler. That's one. And I think in terms of what one is trying to do is a little different from groups like Dastakar and who are doing some fantastic work with sort of marketing, design interventions, etc., is to instill that creative confidence within the craftsperson themselves, to understand the people that they are working with for, and then to have the confidence of designing their own things, to not depend upon the designer. I think that's very, very important, is the withdrawal of somebody who's saying, okay, I need 20,000 of this and I need 10,000 of that. So the middleman and the marketing will always be there to some extent, but to allow the craftsperson some sort of creative, a little more, sort of flexibility and also confidence within themselves. And I think that the social media and the media that they have access to will help in terms of taste in terms of what's the color of the year, what's whatever it is. So yeah, so those are two things that I wanted to add.
Pramod?
So the question of hierarchy does remain in many ways when you look at craft objects. And that is a frustration that we sometimes as curators have when you're trying to showcase things and present multiple stories. But like Kristine said, it is possibly technology that is going to be the great leveler when we have so many newer ways of communicating histories. Currently, as I put a mute object into a display case, beyond my tombstone label or an explanatory label or a sound cast or even an immersive video around it, how do we communicate the stories? Now we have newer forms of social media. We have other ways in which stories can be told. We still haven't reached an ideal where hierarchies can be disappeared and objects, peoples, communities can reference and leverage their own voices. But we definitely are getting to a space where that kind of hierarchy gets broken and we are able to tell more intrinsic stories than just looking at material. I'm not saying our current ways of looking are bad, but I just don't feel they're good enough in looking at it. And this has been my experience in the last 20 years of working in the business. That I really feel that we are still not able to tell the stories without referencing. I mean, you will have far more attention to an object with a royal pedigree as against something that is made for the everyday person. One of the questions I ask my colleagues in the business always is, what are the objects that are not there in the collection that we are working on? What is not archived at all? Those are the hierarchies that really matter. And those are the kinds of things that we need to continue our focus on.
In closing us and opening for the audience, I'd like to add that in the many ways in which the three of you have encountered this part of this conversation, again go back to the way words like folk and tribal will not do justice simply because there are so many colonial connotations that need to be undone when it comes to that. And then there's the second wave, so to speak, right now in contemporary and the era and generation yet to come, where belongingness comes in again in terms of the interplay of power, because as curators, there's also that aspect of responsibility of representing lived experiences that are not ours, and then in that distance, what are the different ways in which we fill that gap, whether it is through curriculum, whether it is through the text and literature around what is being showcased in the exhibition, whether it is through circular economy of the profits and the commerce around exhibitions, and how does that move, who does it support. So it's an interesting aspect of belongingness too, that one must wonder in the generations to come about the communities that we may or may not belong to, and how do we showcase them, and what does power do in that interesting interplay, where things like acknowledgement, things like curriculum, things like the many ways in which realizing that it's an imperfect system is a way to push towards greater starts. And to bring us in for this type of conversation is always very, very important and crucial. So big thanks to the entire team, but we'd like to hear more from the audience. If there are more questions, can I collect more questions? Can I have the mic to Natasha and then to Sabi? Both have raised their hands over here.
Thank you for this really in-depth session and very personalized way of sharing. When there was also talk about friction within the field and within the kind of aspect of craft labor and its presentations, and also the way that Pramod talked about building living encounters, I have been sitting with remembering very actively Kavita Singh, who has been my teacher. I miss her presence, all of us do. And one of the aspects that she would train us in was to keep going back to the politics of museology and the politics of kind of conceiving a common heritage. And I just wondered if, for the larger benefit of us listening to you, when today we know that new kinds of vernacular representations are coming into public presentation through private collections, and at the same time we're seeing the heavy destruction of certain kinds of museums in certain parts of the world. What are the kind of urgencies that you are dealing with in your projects, in some of your projects, around this sort of fissured aspects of museology, if that makes sense?
Well, it's interesting. I usually sense that the tension is almost there when you do governmental projects. When you do private projects, and that is bulk of my work at least, we don't really have that pressure because very often if a collection or an archive exists, it's because they have objects that they really appreciate and they know very little about it and are happy to speak about it. So the fissure or the pressure to look at a different object in a different way doesn't really so much exist in my world. In a few dalliances with the government, we've seen that certain terminologies are not approved, certain kinds of telling stories of communities are not necessarily favored, not because they want to do away with them, but they feel that these are narratives that are constantly evoked and we need to look away. So the times are different. We are definitely negotiating a very thin line between different ways of seeing and telling stories. And a conscious choice one makes now is that at this stage of my career, do I want to encounter and work with people who don't necessarily look at me for my way of looking, but at a way they want to project something? And that's a choice all of us as curators take, whether we want to do it or not. And it's perhaps not that easy for a younger colleague, but for me and for the kind of work we do, we are definitely able to say what is it that we want to work with and how we choose to interpret the material that we are working on. I'm not sure, Natasha, if this answers your question fully, but yeah, this is my take on it.
Sabi?
Thank you for the presentations. To Pramod, I appreciate how you've elaborated on the intangible side of objects, and that really is the emphasis that's needed when looking at crafts, but also artifacts. But I'm also thinking that why is it that that intangible dimension is often through the lens of anthropology? And could it be that anthropology might be then reproducing or reinstating the hierarchies, the social hierarchies of the subject and the object and those kinds of things? Because if you think about other artistic vocations or practices, you can see that there is an equal amount of emphasis on the intangible, but then it doesn't necessarily come from an anthropological lens. It might come from a hermeneutic lens. I mean, if one's looking at poems and poetry, one may bring an anthropological lens, but one may also bring in a hermeneutic and very many other lenses, etymological, how language is transforming, translation studies, so many other intangible sides then come in. And that could it be that anthropology and sociology being the dominant lens to look at the intangible then reproduce certain kinds of ways of seeing them that are unable to maybe rearrange the hierarchies, if not undo them?
Thank you for the questions, Sabi. It's got a very simple answer. My focus looking at anthropological or archaeological or even ephemeral ways is just the baggage I come with as a curator to the table. What are the reasons what are the things that interest me, and what is the filter that I have applied? I'm sure any other curator looking at it from their lens would have their own baggages and perspectives of looking. In 2026, there is really no one final way in which we would look at it. I think there has to be multiple ways. And that's why I feel encouraged that technology will allow us different ways of seeing it through. Say, for example, had Annapurna looked at the same objects that I spoke about, she would perhaps look at it through the filter of design. She would look at the design perspective to try and explain her ideas and her thoughts. So all of us come with our baggage. I wouldn't be confident enough to say that I can look at it 360 degree. And also a little bit of the blame goes to the kind of education we've had, at least in India, where a lot of colonial systems and modes have come into our vocabulary and our viewing language, which is really, undoing the education has been the greatest project of my life. And that's really what I'm trying to do. And that's what we hope we project in objects and the stories that we try and talk about them.
Katya, please. Question. I wanted to circle back to your first question, Shaleen, where you asked what can curators do to undo hierarchies. And I wanted to comment that curators can be advocates for that. I do think there is an active role that they can take. And I think especially in relation to craft, there's a lot of work to be done to undo the economic hierarchies that are often wrapped around craft. And we have very specific examples, especially in relation to the fashion industry, very recent examples. If we think of Prada, for example, and what they've done with the Kolhapuri chapels, selling them at $1,000 a pair, or if we think about the fashion, the French fashion designer Isabelle Marant, working with Mixed people's Oaxaca textiles without their permission, making huge amounts of money from this. So there are huge hierarchies there that I think really do need to be addressed, and curators can have a very strong role in advocating for that.
Wonderful discussion, actually, and I like the temporality of it as well. The stretched temporality allows for, slow thinking and slow release. And I just wanted to circle back to what Annapurna was saying, that using words like exploitation is in a way quite sort of, cliched, as it were, especially in today's times where this kind of rhetoric actually just creates further hierarchies and imbalances. Fear. Yeah, exactly, and fear as well, suspicion. So in my own practice, actually, over the last 3 decades, and in fact, our paths have crossed, many a times. Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, and in my own practice, I've actually tried to look for new frameworks, new terminology, to be able to talk about these very old issues between, the hierarchy between the arts and the crafts, urbanity and rurality, and also all the valorization around these terms. And in fact, that's why I was honored actually to contribute to your catalog on the vernacular and contemporary art, and also in a way read artistry against the grain. So by calling my essay Kumar from Kumaraswamy to Ambedkar, I was already shifting the lens, reading artistry against the grain, and also marrying artistry with the rights discourse. And my entire practice from the very beginning, because I come from the humanities, has always dealt with questions of social justice. And in fact, again, to circle back to something else that you said about the Iranian artists, Munira Farmanyan, and how one of the theorists talked about how there may be a different way of looking at the collaborative process rather than just an exploitative one. I was also thinking about my own book, 13th Place, where during one of the Dialogue Center conversations, we discussed another term for collaboration. And Raj Kumar and we were having a discussion about how collaboration was a word that IFA, in a way, privileged, because those were the early days of giving out these grants. And the Adivasi artists were not very comfortable with it. So then I asked them, so, what is the term that you would, perhaps want to contribute as an alternative? And they said Kala Sahyog. But I said, could we think further, because that's very bureaucratic and governmental. And then Rajkumar came up with Metier, which is a more customary, a kind of barter system where you support your neighbor if they have a problem, if their roof collapses or they need help in the farm, and then they all come together and have a meal together and celebrate that sense of neighborliness. But then I said, but the work that Rajkumar and Shantibai and others are doing at the Dialogue Center, the goalposts have changed. So we need a new kind of terminology. It's no longer just continuing with that kind of bartered alliance of, just that's brought about through the barter system. And he came up with the word Akkal Bata Bati. So that was the phrase, and it's an exchange of ideas and intelligence. Again, because you were talking about various kinds of intelligences, to which I would like to add also this notion of the lekhya and the alekhya, that which is scripted, which comes from print modernity, and the alekhya, which is oral, the oral tradition. And that's what we were trying through that symposium at the Dialogue Center. Not just talking about simple cliches, but actually through language and through actual dialogue, together coming to a third position. And also, I've often had this problem when people say, oh, you know, we have to leave it to the craftsperson or the Adivasi artist to come up with their terminology. Why are you intervening? Why are you having this dialogue? We need something authentic from them. And I think that that's laughable, because if you've actually done work in the field, as all of us have done for many decades now, there is no such thing as the authentic Adivasi artist or the authentic craftsperson. In fact, they are constantly changing. And they're changing much more than we who belong to the middle or the upper middle class, because the kinds of problems at socio-economic, political issues that they're dealing with are quite devastating. And I will use the word urgent. In fact, more urgent for them than bourgeois people like us. So I really, as a curator, for me, as a theorist, it's very important for me that I don't want to withdraw. I want to actively participate in a discussion, even if I know that it will lead to failure. But I'd like to participate, and I do not mind course correction. I do not mind saying that I was wrong. I do not mind saying that even if I have tried to fight against all kinds of prejudices and socialize myself differently from the way I was brought up, I may still have some subconscious prejudices, and I'd like to work on those. So not withdrawal, but active participation. Thank you.